Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. So I do have the round 2 game between Wesley So and Dariusz Świercz. And so you guys know that we are playing the U.S. Championships. You know, Wesley So is originally from the Philippines. Shout out to the Philippines. Dariusz Świercz is actually from Poland. So got a little bit, as you guys can see, I got both flags rolling down there next to the country because they do play for the United States now. So for all of my people from the Philippines, I will say mabuhay to you. Kamusta na aking makaibigan? And I will say, let me see, magandang umaga, magandang apon. Hello, you lit. Amasaw tayo, mag lunch na tayo. Mabuting pagbati to you guys. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking video. Appreciate you guys very much. Anybody who is coming from Poland, I will say Shest, Dziękuję. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. But yes, if you guys are ready to go, let's get rolling and see what we have for this game. It's a nice one. So we do have e4, c5. Knight comes to f3. We got d6, bishop to b5. So we have the Sicilian defense, and it is the canal attack. And you have a couple different options in this position. I mean, there literally is just a few. I mean, you basically have knight to c6, knight to d7, and you have bishop to d7. Those are the only 3 ways that the check can be blocked. I mean, technically, there is the possibility of playing queen to d7 blocking, but nobody is going to do that, ever. So, we're not even talking about that one. So, we do see bishop to d7 in the game. Bishop takes d7. We see queen taking d7. We have c4. So white is electing to go a Maroxy type of bind. So knight does come to f6, attacking the e4 pawn. We do have knight to c3. Knight comes to c6, and then we do have d4. You guys are familiar, at least probably somewhat, with the Maroxy bind. You know, in the e4, c4 situation. Just trying to prevent d5 as much as possible and try to establish that nice pawn center. You know, the nature of the Sicilian is playing c5 to try to disrupt that ideal pawn center as much as possible. So, you know, black is definitely fighting for this center as well. We do have queen coming to g4. And, I mean, this is a nice, like, double attack. You know, the queen is attacking this pawn together with this knight. It is also trying to place an attack on this undefended pawn on g2. So, you know, black is definitely playing very actively. One of the few ways that you can actually, you know, defend is actually to go d5. And, you know, ask this knight where it wants to go. You know, just to make the situation just a little bit different. This does, unfortunately, allow white to establish a very, very nice pawn center and pawn chain compared to black's pawn chain. So the knight comes to d4. We see knight taking d4, queen taking d1, knight taking on d1, and then we have pawn taking d4, and then we do have f3. And then we actually see the novelty of the game, which is rook to c8. Very logical. I mean, this is a half open file, so this rook is trying to attack this undefended pawn. But we do see b3. And like I said, this is a really crazy structure for white to have. You know, we have this situation going on. So it is not every day that you see this type of a pawn structure. So as you can see, compared to black, white has a very superior pawn structure. And it does have this pawn kind of just hanging out in the position all on white's side. And it is very vulnerable. So you actually see black go e5, hoping to try to disrupt what white has going on, because, you know, if we have, you know, the pawn takes e6 en passant, you know, we do have a situation where the pawn comes here, you know, we kind of can just kind of, you know, throw this pawn situation just in the center, and we have disrupted white's pawn center just a little bit. So after we see e5, we actually see g4. You know, white is not really interested in trying to help black in any way. So g4 just starts the attack with this knight. And actually, white is anticipating not even castling. We do have a bishop to e7, and then we have king to e2. And like I said, this is actually the suggested move in the position, just to move the king up. You're planning on moving these 2 minor pieces out of the way and then connecting the rooks. And you'll see that in a minute here. We do actually have h5, trying to break up you know, what white has going on, but we do see pawn pushing to g5. Knight comes back to d7. We see bishop to d2. Castles by black, and then we have knight to f2. And like I said before, you know, we do have our rooks connected. So even though white never castled, they still do have a situation where they have like a nicely placed king, and they do have both of their rooks connected. So, you know, white has basically done everything that you want to do out of the opening. And as you can see, black's position is just a little bit cramped. You know, if the knight ever does kind of hop down into c5, we will be kicking it with b4. And so, you know, the knight would basically be choosing between kind of coming up this way or hanging out on the rim. And that's not really ideal placement for the knight. So we do have a6. Knight comes to d3. We do have f5. And this is a very critical point in the game because we do see pawn takes f6 en passant. You know, you definitely have some decisions to make here. The best possible situation usually is going to be taking with the rook, just keeping it, you know, on this half open file and maybe swinging this rook over. You know, you have to do something because, I mean, you are threatening this bishop right here. So we actually see pawn takes pawn takes f6, but this does open the king up quite a bit. So what you're going to be seeing coming up in this position is, you know, white just working on taking over the game, restricting black's movement, and trying to maximize their pieces in the game. So rook h comes to g1, attacking the king. So the king steps over to h7. And this is critical as well because this king is now basically like cut off from coming away from the h file. So that's not necessarily where you want your king to be, is cut off, because you want your king to start coming into the center. Especially due to the fact that you guys don't have any queens anymore. So you are getting more towards an endgame. You want your king to be pretty active. So we do see rook to g3. We see h4 attacking the rook, but it doesn't really bother the rook because it's just going to move up to g4. You know, you don't have any light squared bishop for black. So, you know, you're sitting on a very safe square as white. And something that you want to notice as well, you know, this bishop is actually very poor. So if you're looking at minor pieces, you know, you can see this bishop has a lot of scope as white. And this bishop literally just has one square to go to. So at the moment, it's kind of like a tall pawn because it's just trapped behind its pawn structure. So that's why you have to be very careful how you're moving your pawns when you're, you know, going through your opening. Because if you do have a bishop, you definitely don't want to have a bunch of dark squared pawns stuck in the center of the board because this bishop is going to be really, really bad. So black is going to start to have to make some concessions to try to free up his bishop, but it's going to be a little bit too late. f5 comes to try to free the bishop a little bit, but after we see pawn takes f5, rook takes f5, we see rook a over to g1. And as you guys can see, I mean, white is just starting to just completely take control of the game. They have 100% control of this file with their rooks. And it's just about trying to maximize your pieces and stuff as white. So we do see rook over to e8. You know, we were looking at rook coming up here to g7 with check, attacking this undefended bishop. So now, unfortunately, we have to make a defensive move with rook to e8. And we have actually reached a point in the game. If you do want to pause the video and see what is the best possible move for white to play, go ahead and do so. All right, cool. So I just got done talking to you guys before about, you know, these minor pieces for black and the fact that the knight doesn't really have a great opportunity to come to the square because of b4. You know, this bishop did kind of get free, but it doesn't have like as much scope as you'd like because it doesn't really have a lot of places it can go to, you know, because it just has these three squares to go to. But I mean, this square is heavily covered. So, you know, the bishop really only has the ability to come here. So, like I said before, you are trying to maximize, just improve your pieces, you know, for white. So if you guess knight down to f2, you would be absolutely correct, because what you should notice in the position for white is that this is a very, very nice square for this knight to go to. It cannot be influenced by this bishop because this bishop is dark squared. So this is a very juicy looking square for white. So knight to f2 is planning to plant this knight up here on e4 at some point. And so to try to prevent that, we see black playing knight to f6, and then we do see rook up to g7 with check. King comes up to h8. and we actually see rook over to f7, and this is making it very unpleasant for black, because if the knight does come to e4, you are looking at the pinning of this, and then the rook is going to be swinging up, and so you can see that black is in a very binded position. So the rook swings over to h5, anticipating the pinning of the knight. So we do see rook over to g6, and as you guys can see right now, these rooks are attacking this under defended knight. So you would gladly give up one of your rooks for two of black's pieces. So the knight does come back to g8, and then now white is able to get their knight to e4, move in. And so, as you guys can see, black is becoming very restricted in their movements. The rook does step over to d8. We see bishop over to g5, basically pinning this bishop to this rook. We don't want to give up the exchange, so the rook does come up to h7, trying to exchange a rook off, but there is a very nice combination in the position, and it is basically sacrificing the exchange to line up these rooks on this diagonal and take advantage of the fact you have the dark square bishop. So we do see rook taking e7, rook taking e7, and then as you guys can see, like I said, this bishop is trained on both of these rooks, and for good measure, Wesley So actually takes the pawn on h4. Something I want to tell you guys about is when you do have a situation where you can capture some material as white, a lot of the times you have the possibility of not actually capturing immediately. So, I mean, you can always, just capture the piece immediately right here. But why not grab a little bit of material? Because these rooks are not going anywhere. If either one of these rooks move, you always have the option of taking the rook, immediately. But why not grab a little bit of material before you do actually capture these rooks? And that's exactly what Wesley So does. It's kind of like a Zug situation. So after we see bishop taking h4, we do see black resigning the game. And it might kind of look like, man, I mean, the position isn't that bad. Like, I'm just down a pawn. But you have to look at a lot of different things. The fact that you are down a pawn, your pawn structure isn't the best. This king is going to improve its position. You do have this king cut off on this file. So after we would see an example variation like, the rook d coming to e8, you would see bishop taking e7. And then after the rook took e7, the rook would be taking on d4. Now you are down two entire pawns. And I mean, like I said, this king is going to start rolling up this way. You're going to see these pawns starting to roll, taking advantage of this majority over here on the king side. It's just a really nice position for white to be in. And there really isn't anything left, for black to do. If black just kind of, let's say, wants to kind of swing over here like this, you're going to be looking at rook to e6, and you're just going to continuously just attack white's pieces. You can always throw this check in here, but like I said, this king is going to just nestle nicely here, and this pawn is going to be dropping, you can always like push the pawn and break them up and then capture here, but you do have a passed pawn that you do have to worry about as black. So this is not something that you can continue to play through, and that is all she wrote. But like I said, going back to what we had in the game, we did see the resignation of Dariusz Świercz in this position in lieu of what I said. And that's just one of the possible variations. There's many different variations, but that's probably going to be one of the best. So, I appreciate you guys very much for coming by. Dziękuję and maraming salamat aking makaibigan. Makito tayo mamaya paalam, and I will see you guys next time.